It is time to be a hater. It is time to be a hater. Hi everyone, my name is Angela and this is going to be my worst books of 2024. I've never made one of these before. Last year I did a best books video and that's it, so I'm kind of excited to talk about books that just didn't work for me. This is not going to be the most negative worst books video you've ever seen in your life. I am not a person who's going to finish a 1-star book, okay? If a book is giving 1-star energy, I'm gonna DNF that so quick. So all of these books on this list are either 2.5 or 2 stars. We are gonna go in order from best to worst, so the ones at the end of the video are gonna be my absolute worst books of the year. Coming in at number 9, we have A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faizal. This is a YA fantasy novel about vampires. Our main character, Arthi, is a young woman who runs a tea room, and at night it transforms into a bloodhouse for vampires. This is actually an illegal business, so she's kind of a criminal from the start, but when she finds out that her business is in jeopardy, she has to pull off a heist and infiltrate a secret vampire society in order to save her business. So we kind of have that classic YA trope of pulling together a group of ragtag individuals, outcasts, and pulling off a heist. There's also a bit of a King Arthur retelling in this, her name is Arthi, like Arthur, and I thought it didn't really add much to the story at all. And as someone who really loves King Arthur, anything to do with King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, I was really disappointed that that was just barely in there. This is one of those books where the synopsis sounds so amazing, and when you actually read the book, the execution just doesn't live up to your expectations. And that kind of comes up again and again throughout this list. It's just a synopsis with so many buzzwords and tropes that sound so amazing that the actual book does not live up to how good the marketing is for the book. This one was just boring. It was a slog to get through. The only reason that I finished this was because I was determined to make a video reviewing this book, which actually did pretty well, at least for my channel. So I'm glad that I read it for that reason at least. I actually think I gave it 3 stars in that video, but later lowered it to a 2.5 because everything I wanted to say about this book was pretty much negative. For a book that is about a heist, the heist was so boring, so lackluster. I didn't think that the world building or the characters or the plot were really good enough to merit, a good review or holding my attention. There was an interesting reveal or two at the end, but having one good reveal at the end of a book does not, carry a 400 something page fantasy novel. I can see how people would like it. I just did not like it. At number 8 is Where the Dark Stands Still by A.B. Puranik. This is another YA fantasy where the synopsis sounded really, really good and it just did not work for me. This book draws from Polish/Slavic folklore. Our main character is a young woman named Liska who lives in her Polish village, and she unfortunately has magical powers, and people with magical powers are considered to be very dangerous and monstrous. She is very much ostracized and in fear of hurting others, and she will do anything to get rid of these powers. So at the beginning of the story, we find Liska journeying into this mystical, magical forest, which lies at the outskirts of her town, and she is going to find a magical flower. It's rumored that if you find this magical flower, you get one wish, and she wants to wish her powers away. But what actually happens is she finds the guardian of the woods, who is a demon, and this demon wants her to stay in his sentient house for 1 year in exchange for receiving the flower at the end of her sentence. And so we are watching Liska get acquainted with this demon and his home and living in the forest, and eventually there is a plot that has to do with something dangerous and mysterious happening in the woods. I was really excited for this book because I have Polish heritage that I'm a little bit connected to, but not really. My mom's from Poland, so I know a lot of Polish words, but I don't actually speak Polish, and I've only been there once. So I wanted this to be, a special novel that I could really connect to, but unfortunately I was so bored. This was another one where I really wanted to make a video review because I read this around the time that it came out, maybe a little bit before. And so I really desperately wanted to finish this. I think I paid for the audiobook even though I had the ebook because I just couldn't sit there and read the last 100 pages physically. I could appreciate the writing style and the atmosphere that the author was creating, but neither of those was enough to keep me engaged throughout the story. I think this is kind of an unpopular opinion. I've seen a lot of good reviews of this, so maybe if you read this, go into it expecting to be sustained by the vibes. There's also a romance in this book, which I found to be boring. I didn't really care. I didn't really think that either of the characters were as interesting as they could have been. So it's just like, eh. A lot of people really love the ending, but because I just didn't care about anything, I was just like, okay. At number 7, we have Disoriental by Negar Javadi. Did my best with the pronunciation, I apologize. This book was translated from the French by Tina Cover. This is a historical fiction, multi-generational tale of the Sadr family. And we follow our main character, Kimmy, and her family flee from Iran to France because of some political persecution of her father. And in the present timeline, Kimmy is sitting in a fertility clinic in Paris, I believe in like the early 2000s or the 90s. And as she's sitting in this fertility clinic, she is just flooded with all these memories from her childhood, memories of her family, stories of her family where she wasn't even there. And so we're kind of jumping around in time following Kimmy's memories. And it's kind of like she's telling us the story of her ancestors. There's also a lot in here about the politics and history of Iran, and there were just these really long paragraphs just like info dumping information in a way that felt like not seamless at all. It felt very clunky and hard to, it sounds horrible, but it was hard to care. It was just like I wanted to learn, but the way that it was done just felt like a random excerpt from a textbook was just dumped into this narrative to help us understand the story. There were a lot of names of, you know, people who were important to the politics in like the 70s in Iran. And it's like, I don't know about you, but I personally do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of 1970s politicians across the globe. So it was a bit hard to follow. And in the synopsis of this book, it says that our main character, Kimmy, is a queer punk rocker. And when I tell you that we did not get any discussions of either of those things until like the last 20% of this book, which was so sad because I felt like that part was really interesting and I wanted to know more about Kimmy. So unfortunately, I just think that this was a little bit too experimental and weirdly told for my taste. This is definitely a me problem. This book has many awards and accolades, and like I feel stupid that I didn't like this book. It was just too weirdly told. I felt like we were focusing on too many characters, too many ancestors, and I just wanted it to be more about Kimmy herself because she was, to me, the most interesting part of this book. So I think the elements of this story told in a different way could have been a really wonderful book for me, but I think I'm just more of a cookie cutter historical fiction person rather than like a very literary historical fiction type of person. At number 6, we have This Ravenous Fate by Haley Dennings. I was really excited to read this book because Haley Dennings is or was a booktuber, and I had watched some of her videos, so when I heard that she was coming out with a book, I was super excited to read her first book. And even though I didn't really like this book very much, I do want to say that like it's a debut novel, and that's very hard to, you know, write a debut novel that's like amazing and beloved by everyone. So I would definitely read more from this author in the future in a different series. This is another YA fantasy book, and I feel like I just need to stop picking up YA fantasy unless there's like a really solid reason why I think I'm gonna love it. And I have loved YA fantasy books over the past few years, just this unfortunately was not one of them. In this book, we're following two young black women in 1920s Harlem. Layla is a vampire, and the other character, Elise, is the heir to her family's vampire hunting fortune. I think her father makes like bullets that kill vampires, something like that. And these two girls have a history. They actually used to be best friends, but something happened that we don't know about at first, and they now really hate each other. And the main plot comes in when Layla is actually framed for a murder, and Elise and Layla actually have to work together to solve this murder that she was framed for. This is also like a sapphic romance, so there's a lot of like tension between these two girls who both have a history and hate each other. And I will say that was the strong point of the book for me, was their romance and the enemies to lovers vibes. I did think those were really there. But this wasn't just a romance book, it was a fantasy. There was also a mystery element, and unfortunately the plotting of the fantasy and the plotting of the mystery I did not find to be good. I also was disappointed by the like 1920s setting. I didn't think that the writing or the dialogue or the like descriptions really evoked the setting enough for me. Like they went to a few jazz clubs, but ultimately like you could have said this was, you know, during another time period and it wouldn't have really taken away anything from the story. So this one was disappointing, but I would read definitely a romance book from this author in the future. Coming in at number 5 is a adult fantasy book by a beloved fantasy author who is not so beloved anymore because some very serious allegations came out about this author after I read this book. So I don't feel as bad about not liking it, and I will not be reading anything else from this author, but that is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. It's basically like there is another world, another city underneath London, and our main character, Richard, is like a businessman in London, and he gets thrust into this adventure in this other world. So we're following him discovering this weird, bizarre, humorous Neverwhere world underneath London, and this book has quite a dark and humorous tone. I found that a lot of the humor was like based on like geographic knowledge of London and like the London tube system and like certain stops and neighborhoods in London. I felt like there were jokes that were being made that I didn't understand because I've never been to London. You know, like I don't know. I felt like I was missing out on the joke because I didn't have all of the context, and that was irritating. There was not as much fantasy in this book as you would think. I think it was just more like weird, humorous characters doing bizarre, uncanny things, and it was supposed to be funny, and some of it was, but it was just like, There's some sort of commentary about, you know, the modern work life because he's like a businessman and then he's thrown into this weird, bizarre, dirty world, and I don't know. I was bored. Didn't like the characters, didn't like the world building, didn't like the humor, didn't like the tone. The writing was good. Right, I mean, he can write words, but as a fantasy book, did not like it. I think this book definitely accomplishes what it sets out to accomplish. I just didn't like its project, and I didn't know that before going into it. Like I didn't go into this expecting to, you know, hate read it. This actually reminds me a lot of another book by a British fantasy author called The Air Affair by Jasper Fforde that I had to read in college that I hated. And I hated it even though Jane Eyre is literally my favorite book of all time. So I think I just don't like British humorous fantasy books that are supposed to be a little absurd and like weird. Not for me. At number 4, we have How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. This is a like country house murder mystery novel. The premise sounds really good. So this is like dual timelines. So in the past timeline, we have Frances, who is a teenage girl in the 1960s. She gets her fortune told, and the fortune teller says that she's going to be murdered. So she spends her whole life in perpetual terror of someone murdering her and kind of tracking dirt on people and like keeping track of secrets and all of that. And in her timeline, we're also following her friend group and their drama. And then she's also having interactions with this mysterious wealthy man in the town who we know that she ends up marrying, which is more on that later. And then in the present timeline, we have Annie, who is her great niece, and she is trying to solve Frances's murder because yes, Frances actually did get murdered. The way that Annie did not start investigating the murder until like 40% of the book, I mean, don't quote me on that, but like I just remember looking at the percentage in my Kindle and be like, are you kidding me? We are this far into the book and she hasn't even started like asking questions around town. I feel like even when she did start investigating, it was just like so lackluster and so little of the book, and like that's kind of what you love about a small town murder, right? It's like going around to all these people who have interconnected lives and stories and, you know, finding out the local tea. It was just boring. Didn't like it. The past timeline was so much more interesting. I actually buddy read this with my friend Emily, and we were just texting each other being like, the past timeline is so much better. The past timeline is so much better. Frances has some really like toxic and messy friendship dynamics in the 1960s with her friends, but also this like man in his 20s. I think he's in his like mid 20s. He's like living in this mansion alone. He's like a real adult, and she's 17, and we're seeing them like meet for the first time and interact, And, you know, in the present timeline, we know that this is her husband, like that I think he's dead, but, you know, they were married, and it's like really brushed over that they got together and like grooming? Hello? What? She's 17? Like, what is, I was so confused. I was like, did I miss something? Like, I was like going back to like check their ages. I'm like, the math was not mathing. I was so confused. I was like, why? And I know in the second book, like, maybe we're gonna find out like why they got together. Maybe he was a horrible husband. Maybe it was like a whole thing. But I wanted that to be in this book. I'm not gonna read the other book. I wanted that in this book. So yes, this is the first 2-star book of the list, and the rest of these are 2 stars. These last 3 books are all books that I physically own and I paid full price for, so isn't that fun? Coming in at number 3 is The Last Chance Library by Freya Sampson, another book set in England that I did not like. I really love England, but maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to take a break from books set in England because clearly it's not working out. This is a like cozy contemporary book about our main character June, who is a librarian, and she is trying to stop the local council from defunding her local library where she works. June is characterized as being very timid and shy. She really just stays in her house and reads and goes to work, and she doesn't do anything else. She lost her mother a few years ago, and ever since then she's kind of been keeping the world out and kind of too scared to take risks or put herself out there. I thought all of that was interesting. I thought that was an interesting character to explore, but we got to this part where she is absolutely ridiculously without a backbone that it drove me up the wall. I have to spell it out for you guys, so if you don't want to be spoiled for like a minor detail of this book, you can skip to the next book in the list. So June's boss at the library, I don't remember her name, let's call her Mary. So Mary says to her, hey June, you know my daughter, you guys were friends in high school. They were, but June hasn't been friends with her in a very long time. And Mary's like, my daughter told me she's gonna have a stripper at her bachelorette party, and I don't want her to have a stripper because that makes the family look bad. So I want you to go to my daughter's bachelorette party and somehow stop this stripper from performing. And June isn't even invited to the bachelorette party. Mary is gonna like force her daughter to invite her for nebulous reasons. And June is like, okay. That was just so incredibly ridiculous and unrealistic. Like, how much do you have to lack a backbone or like any self-respect, any ability to stand up for yourself and be like, that is ridiculous. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I know that this scenario was probably supposed to be, you know, humorous and tongue-in-cheek and whatever, but I just found it so stupid that I couldn't get over it the rest of this book. That's not the only thing I hated. It was boring. I was bored. You know, there was some wholesome and cute moments. There was a little bit of charm, but there wasn't nearly as much as I would want from a book like this. And I was just so annoyed with June for like being so spineless. So yeah, there was like a little bit of a romance, which is fine, but ultimately this one just fell flat for me, and I wish I hadn't paid $16 for it. Coming in at number 2 for the second worst book that I read this year is Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren. You know, I was willing to give this book a little bit of credit because it came out so long ago, but I just checked and this came out in 2019, which is not that long ago. So our main characters are Sam and Tate. Sam is the girl. Nope. Sam is the boy. Okay, so Tate is the girl, and she is just graduated from high school. She's 18, and she goes on a trip to London with her grandma. While they're in London at a restaurant, they meet these other 2 American people, Sam and his grandpa, and the 4 of them realize that they're staying at the hotel, so they kind of become friends during this 2-week trip. Okay, keep that in mind, 2-week trip to London. As I said, Tate is 18. She's just finished high school, so she is still essentially a child, even though she's legal and adult. She, you know, hasn't been to college, hasn't had a full-time job. Her life experiences are just that she went to school. Sam is 21 years old, and they very quickly fall for each other during this trip to London. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, okay, Angela, like, is the 3-year age gap really that big of a deal? Okay, it felt weird, okay? And there was an on-page sex scene of them having sex when she was 18 and he was 21. And, you know, Tate is more than she seems, okay? She is actually the daughter of a big film star. And her family has managed to keep her identity a secret from the tabloids because, you know, the tabloids suck and they don't want her to be hounded by them. Tate tells her secret to Sam. And at the end of the trip, Tate is surrounded by paparazzi. How did they find out about her? So you're thinking, okay, surely Sam didn't really sell her out to the paparazzi, like there must be some sort of misunderstanding, but you're not sure, and Tate is under the impression that he did sell her out, so they part ways. They never see each other until 14 years later. Tate is going to be starring in this movie, and what she doesn't know is that Sam wrote the movie. So she gets to set, and it's very awkward because it's like this guy she had a fling with who sold her out to the paparazzi. Whatever. She's a Nepo baby, you know, working on a movie. They fall in love. I am going to spoil what happens in this. So if you don't want to know, skip to the last book in the list, but I don't think you should read this. So I would encourage you to stay. So, you know, I'm thinking, okay, we're finally going to resolve, like, who sold her out. I'm thinking, you know, maybe the grandma accidentally let it slip, right? That makes sense, because there was some throwaway line about, like, you know, grandma had lunch with an old friend or something, I think. No, he did sell her out. He did. He sold her out to the tabloids for money because his grandpa was sick and they needed money for his medical bills so they didn't lose the farm. So he sold her out to the press back in the day. And he tells her this, and they still fall in love again and end up together. So not only was there this weird age gap where she's like just out of high school and he's 21, like I'm thinking about it from my perspective. When I was 21, I was a junior in college, okay? I was, you know, going to my first bars and drinking legally for the first time. I would never, ever have considered dating someone who just graduated from high school. Like, that's weird, right? So not only was there that, but just like the plot twist of like, oh yeah, he actually did sell her out, but like his grandpa was sick and he needed money. So it's like, it's fine. I just think that that is so stupid. Like, you gotta give them credit. Like, that is kind of funny. But this was just a bad romance book. I don't know why this was republished with this cover. Like, y'all should have just kept this in the vault, okay? Just, like, you don't need to market this. You guys have enough. Like, I like Christina Lauren, okay? I have given at least 3 of their books 4 or more stars. So, like, this was, like, a shock. So I'm gonna stop talking about this, but yeah, this was bad. I guess if you want to see how everything unfolds, give it a try, but no. And we are at my number 1 least favorite book of 2024, a book that I paid $28 plus the sales tax for, and that is Murder Your Employer, McMaster's Guide to Homicide by Rupert Holmes. If you didn't know, Rupert Holmes is the man who wrote the Pina Colada song. Fun fact. He should have stopped there. He should have stopped with the Pina Colada song or whatever else he's written. He should have not written this because this was bad. This is another one where the premise sounds fun. We basically have this school for murderers. They call it deletists in this book. And they're kind of teaching you how to murder with style, murder with pizzazz, to not get caught, to, you know, follow their principles. So when you go to this school, you essentially, like, your thesis is this person that you want to murder eventually. And if you don't succeed in your murder, you get murdered by the school. So it's kind of funny. The first, you know, few pages, you know, you might get like a silent chuckle. It's like kind of an FAQ about the school and telling you how to determine if you should murder this person. But then you get into the actual story And we're following this guy. What's his name? His name is Cliff. He's trying to murder some guy. Oh, by the way, this takes place in like the 50s or 60s. You do not get told that ever. You just have to eventually figure it out by context clues. So you're following Cliff, and you're also following two women at the school who are all trying to murder someone. The only real mystery here is like, are they gonna succeed in their murders? Will they get caught? Is the person gonna die? You know, how is it gonna unfold? Ugh. And that is so boring. And not only is it boring, but one of the plot lines has so much to do with this actress who has to like sleep with the movie execs to, you know, get ahead in Hollywood. I'm just like, what fantasy is this guy playing out? Like, what is going on? Why is a man writing about like sexual harassment in the workplace like that? It was so weird. I was like, why are we writing about this? And then there was this whole thing of like, oh, a man in the dress is like the butt of a joke and it's so funny. And like, they're trying to set up this bad person to be humiliated after his death. So they put him in a dress in a situation where it seems like he was having sex with a man. And that was like the most humiliating thing that they could think of. It was just like weirdly regressive in terms of like how we were writing about women, how we were writing about queer people. I was just like, it was so boring. It was borderline offensive. There's no mystery. There's no twist. There's no gotcha. It's just, you're just watching these people plan out their murders. They're at this school. The characters are boring. The map is beautiful. There's a map of the school. Good job to the map artist. The most that I can say is that the book had a good concept. Reading the synopsis, I was invested in the possibility. But yeah, I mean, there might have been like 2 chuckles throughout the book. That's why it's not 1 star. It's 2 stars. Because like, sure, there was some wry humor in terms of, you know, making murder this kind of like elegant thing that needs to be like taught and learned and policed. But this was a waste of my time, and I paid full price for this. And the cover is so pretty. So I'm really hoping that someone will buy this from me, like at the bookstore where I sell my books. Oh, there's also like a romance in here. No, I think that straight old men should be not allowed to write romance ever. Those are all of my worst books. Please let me know if you have opinions on any of these. Obviously, I didn't like them, but if you like them, I want to hear why, because that's interesting and that's fun. And I'm not glad I read all of these, but I'm glad that I had books to rant about in this video. If you watched this video, thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more bookish content from me, and I hope you have a lovely week.